Welcome everyone to today's second class on brain stimulation. We have today Dr. Sachin Baliga, who is PDF in non-invasive brain stimulation at NIMHANS. He has done his both MBBS and post-graduation in psychiatry from Nair Hospital, Mumbai. He has also won 2 awards, Young Psychiatrist, Young Researcher Award, and also Best Paper Award. We also have Dr. Jagdisha Tirthali with us.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Today's class is the second in the series of lectures on non-invasive brain stimulation. And today's class session. So, when we talk of the word special population, the first thing that comes to mind is the word special. It's kind of a euphemism, a mild word to say ECT in complicated cases. The main idea of taking this lecture is to bring to your attention that it doesn't always have to be this way. With proper planning, anticipation, monitoring, and precautions, ECTs in this population can be conducted without any complications and can be completed without much problems in most of the cases. So I'll be covering this topic under the headings of ECT in those with medical comorbidities, elderly population, pregnancy and postpartum period, and childhood and adolescents. So why treat a person who is medically ill with ECTs? The first will be the usual indications of ECT, such as suicidality as a part of depression, aggression, catatonia, etc. These will be covered in detail in the next class on ECT. Apart from this, it has also been noticed that psychiatric illnesses are frequently associated with poor self-care and quality of life and can lead to poor control of medical illness if the psychiatric illness is untreated. For example, patients of depression with comorbid diabetes and hypertension. It has also been seen that there is an improvement in these medical illnesses with the treatment of the psychiatric illness itself. Lastly, there is a reduction in all-cause mortality and morbidity due to the medical illness once the treatment is completed with ECTs. So, why should we be worried about medical illnesses? There can be a variety of interactions among different variables, such as altered physiology due to the medical illness, such as hypertension, medications given for the medical illness itself, such as antiepileptics in a case of seizure disorder, anesthesia-induced physiological changes, the electrical stimulus per se, and the seizure itself. So what can be done in these cases? Broadly, alterations can be brought about in the medications that are given for the medical illness, the anesthetic agent, the electrical stimulus, and in some cases, even the electrode placement. Apart from this, monitoring, sometimes using additional gadgets such as the tachometer, and importantly, consultation liaison with specialists may also be required. In the heading of medical illnesses, we will first talk about neurological disorders. Now, as discussed in the previous lecture, an electroconvulsive therapy that leads to successful induction of seizure leads to sympathetic activity, causing nearly a 200% increase in the oxygen consumption in the brain and nearly 300% increase in the blood flow with the onset of seizures. Hence, it could be an issue of concern in those cases of intracranial masses which have baseline raised intracranial tension and have a risk of causing brain herniation. Secondly, intracranial masses are also associated with local cerebrovascular fragility and can be a source of rupture and intracranial hemorrhage secondary to the sympathetic response. In these cases, care has to be taken for stringent control of hypertension using antihypertensives. It also has to be taken care in these cases that significant hypotension brought about by these medications can lead to its own morbidity. Use of steroids, diuretics such as mannitol, and hyperventilation may also be required. Next, coming to cerebrovascular accidents, the primary issue of concern in these cases is risk of intracerebral bleed. Hence, hemorrhagic strokes are more worrisome as compared to ischemic strokes. There have been case reports of successful ECTs as early as 2 weeks after ischemic strokes. While doing baseline assessment in these cases, the recency of the lesion, sites, and the control of risk factors needs to be assessed. Similar to previous case, control of the hypertensive surge due to sympathetic response is required using antihypertensives. Anesthetic agents such as propofol or higher dose of thiopentone can also be used to reduce the mean arterial pressure. Next, coming to dementia. Recent reviews have shown that in cases of dementia, ECTs have been successfully used to treat severe behavioral and psychological symptoms associated with it, such as aggression or full-blown psychotic symptoms, such as hallucinations and delusions. It should also be remembered that this group of population frequently presents with depression masquerading as pseudodementia, and in these cases as well, improvement in the depressive symptoms also leads to improvement in cognition with ECTs. However, there is an increased risk of cognitive dysfunction and post-ECT confusion in these cases. We will be discussing in details about management in this group of population when we talk about ECTs in elderly. Next, coming to comorbid epilepsy. The two concerns in these cases are, firstly, that ECT may cause prolonged or spontaneous seizures in rare cases. Secondly, as they are frequently on one or more anti-epileptic agents, due to high threshold, seizure generation may be difficult. In such a case, variety of strategies such as reducing or skipping the night dose of the anti-epileptic drugs or ensuring that the morning dose of the drug is taken soon after the ECT instead of before ECT can be tried. In cases where seizure induction is still difficult after taking these precautions, additional methods such as using another anesthetic agent such as ketamine or hyperventilation may have to be tried. At this point, it is important to remember that ECT acts as an anticonvulsant. And as we know that with subsequent ECT sessions, a person's seizure threshold increases. In fact, ECT has rarely been also used to abort status epilepticus and cases of intractable seizures. And hence, epilepsy is not a contraindication for administration of ECTs. Next, coming to brain trauma. These cases are frequently associated with greater cognitive side effects after the ECT procedure. The second concern in these cases is that in case the electrodes are placed over the skull defect for administration of seizure, shunting of the electric current can happen, leading to failure of generation of seizures. Hence, appropriate precautions to ensure proper electrode placement may be required. Thirdly, in cases of application of a ventriculoperitoneal shunt in these cases, it is important to check for patency of the shunt. It should also be remembered that having a VP shunt per se is not a contraindication, as these days most VP shunts are made up of silicone-based materials. Next, coming to myasthenia gravis. The primary pathology in myasthenia gravis is autoantibodies against the acetylcholinergic receptors. Hence, these individuals show an erratic response to succinylcholine. They can show increased resistance to succinylcholine due to the presence of autoantibodies to the acetylcholine receptors. Secondly, as these individuals are frequently on anticholinesterase inhibitors such as pyridoxine, they can show slow recovery from the succinylcholine itself. These individuals also frequently show increased sensitivity to curariform drugs such as atracurium. Hence, prolonged apnea might be anticipated and necessary precautions such as reversal of the skeletal muscle relaxation using atropine and neostigmine might be required. Next, coming to Parkinson's disease. ECTs are associated with improvement in the dopaminergic tone, particularly in the striatum post-sessions. Hence, ECTs may even be used as a therapeutic tool in Parkinson's disease, particularly in severe cases with the start of on-off symptoms of Parkinson's. It is also important that due to the increased dopaminergic tone, they may show side effects associated with levodopa, such as hallucinations. Hence, it might be required to reduce the levodopa dose to half through the course of ECT. These cases may also be associated with greater cognitive side effects due to ECTs. Lastly, coming to neuroleptic malignant syndrome, ECTs are particularly useful in quick control of the NMS and recovery. Once the baseline parameters are brought under control, ECTs can be successfully used in these cases. It is important to remember as due to muscle rigidity, they may show a baseline hyperkalemia, which can exacerbate due to succinylcholine itself, leading to cardiac complications such as cardiac arrest. Hence, necessary precautions or taking an alternative skeletal muscle relaxant might be necessary. Next, coming to cardiovascular disorders. Now, cardiovascular complications are frequently the cause of deaths attributed to ECT, in some cases up to 30%. Particularly risky ones are the history of recent myocardial infarction, unstable angina, uncompensated failure, severe valvular disease, significant arrhythmias, and uncontrolled hypertension. I would not be going into the physiology of each case. However, it is prudent that cardiology opinion be taken in these cases. As required, cardiac investigations such as ECG, 2D echo, and stress test may be undertaken. As much as possible, stabilization of the cardiac parameters using antihypertensives, antiarrhythmics, and anticholinergics must be done. Important things to remember in these cases is that antihypertensives should be given on the morning before ECT, even if the person is nil by mouth, so as to ensure that the sympathetic surge is blunted. In cases where beta blockers are used, it is important to remember that they may cause dangerous bradycardias leading to arrhythmias, especially in cases where the electrical stimulus fails to induce a seizure, as there is no compensatory sympathetic discharge. In cases where lidocaine is used as an antiarrhythmic agent, it is important to remember that lidocaine may have a potent anticonvulsant effect. Hence, a cardiac consultation to consider change of an antiarrhythmic agent may be required. It is also important that implanted pacemakers are not a contraindication for induction of ECTs. In fact, they might particularly be useful as they might help in bringing the rate under control. Next, coming to other medical conditions. In cases of diabetes, the primary concern is dangerous hypoglycemia as it can cause seizures. Hence, anti-diabetic medications are best avoided on the days of ECTs and be administered after the ECT procedure. Also, ECTs are physiologically associated with significant body stress, and due to release of stress-related hormones such as glucagon, adrenaline, they may cause hyperglycemia, which in normal cases might not be problematic, but can give rise to dangerous levels of sugar levels in those who have diabetes. Hence, necessary monitoring is required. In case of other endocrine disorders, clinically significant hyperthyroidism with raised T4 levels might be particularly risky due to threat of causing a thyroid storm. With respect to hypothyroidism, hypoparathyroidism, literature contributes no significant risk with ECTs. However, anesthetists might raise a concern due to reports of delayed recovery in cases of significant hypothyroidism. With pheochromocytoma, it is necessary that strict antihypertensive measures are taken so as to prevent hypertensive surge. With respect to Addison's disease, as ECT leads to a stress on the body, increased dose of steroids may be required before ECT. Next, coming to dyselectrolytemias, hyperkalemia can have a significant cardiac risk with succinylcholine, as succinylcholine by itself leads to increase in potassium levels. Hence, it is best to shift to non-depolarizing agents such as atracurium. To complete the list, other conditions that might require avoiding succinylcholine are suspected or proven pseudocholinesterase deficiencies, muscle membrane dysfunctions, such as in cases of severe rigidity leading to hyperkalemia, and in cases of severe burns, such as third-degree burns. Hypokalemia might be associated with prolonged respiratory paralysis and apnea. Hyponatremia can by itself lead to spontaneous seizures, and hence it is best to stabilize the sodium levels before posting a patient for ECTs. With respect to hypernatremia, there is a theoretical risk of increasing seizure threshold. Next, coming to porphyria, these individuals are particularly susceptible to barbiturates as it can precipitate a porphyria attack. Hence, it is best to avoid thiopentone in these cases. Next, coming to chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, bronchodilators are best administered before the ECT so as to prevent ECT-related respiratory complications. These individuals are frequently on theophylline, which is a CNS stimulant and may cause prolonged seizures. Hence, with proper consultation with a chest physician, it might be prudent to minimize the use or even stop and shift to beta agonists in these cases. With respect to urinary retention, it is better to undergo Foley's catheterization so as to prevent a risk of bladder rupture with the ECTs. With respect to bone joint diseases such as osteoporosis, a greater dose of succinylcholine may be required so as to prevent complications such as fracture. Other cases where a higher dose of succinylcholine may be required are recent history of abdominal surgeries with a surgical wound and in cases of thrombophlebitis. In those who have poor dental hygiene, a proper dental consultation with removal of the loose teeth may be required so as to prevent the detachment of tooth and aspiration during the ECT procedure. In cases where urgent ECTs are required and this may not be possible, using specific measures such as a rolled piece of gauze to cover the tooth to prevent its aspiration might be done after dental consultation. In cases of thrombophlebitis, it is necessary that a good dose of anticoagulant is administered so as to keep the INR in the levels of 1.5 to 2.5. A greater dose of muscle relaxant might also be required to prevent dislodgement of an embolus with the onset of ECT. In cases of sickle cell disease, the BP cuff method or the limb isolation method of monitoring seizures is best avoided due to risk of precipitating a sickle crisis due to the hypoxia. In cases of thrombocytopenia or thrombocythemia, reports suggest no specific precautions. Lastly, coming to ophthalmic disorders, ECTs are associated with a mild increase in intraocular pressure. As such, there are no problems reported in patients of open-angle glaucoma. However, those with closed-angle glaucoma might be a problem. And in these cases, anti-glaucoma measures may be prudent so as to ensure that the intraocular pressures are kept under control. These patients might be frequently on long-acting anticholinesterases such as pyridostigmine, which may lead to prolonged apnea with succinylcholine due to slow clearance of the drug. There are no reports as such of retinal detachment or worsening of the same with ECTs. However, one could avoid rigorous head movements and proper antihypertensive measures might be considered so as to prevent rise in intraocular pressure. At best, it is prudent to take an ophthalmic consultation when in doubt. Now, a slide on anesthetic aspects of ECT for cases where there are suicide attempts. These patients might use measures such as self-immolation or organophosphorus compounds to attempt suicide. In these cases, succinylcholine might be avoided as due to third-degree burns, there might be dangerous levels of hyperkalemia which can lead to cardiac arrest when succinylcholine is also used. Also, OP compounds might lead to very low levels of pseudocholinesterase in the blood, which might cause prolonged apnea and respiratory paralysis. Next, we come to elderly group of population. Now, ECTs are particularly useful in this group of population as they are associated frequently with medication intolerance. As they are also on multiple drugs, drug interactions are also common. Medication resistance is also common in this group of population, particularly those with late onset of psychiatric illnesses. With compared to these things, the side effects of ECTs are much less common as compared to that of medications. The response of ECTs is much better in the elderly. In fact, studies have also shown that as compared to young population, the response is better and leads to better quality of life as compared to younger population. Due to general debility, it might also be required as a quick response in cases of severe retardation and stupor, refusal of food, suicide risk, and psychotic symptoms. Now, there are two concerns with respect to ECTs in elderly. First is that there might be much higher seizure threshold in this group of population due to leading to a failure in induction of seizures. In these cases, measures such as stopping benzodiazepines or anticonvulsants, hyperventilation, minimizing the dose of thiopentone or shifting to another anesthetic agent such as ketamine, or decrease in the pulse frequency or pulse width of the stimulus may be tried. The second concern in these cases is that of cognitive side effects. Particularly, factors such as increased age, medical comorbidity, medications, and pre-existing baseline cognitive problems might further push a person towards cognitive side effects. Out of these, baseline cognitive dysfunction has been found to be the best predictor of cognitive side effects with ECTs. Post-ictal delirium is also common in these cases and may last longer as compared to that in younger population. One can minimize cognitive side effects in this group of population by considering unilateral ECTs, reducing the frequency of the ECT sessions, optimal dosing of the electrical stimulus, or considering brief pulse or ultra brief pulse to brief pulse is also required. It is important to again recollect that ECTs are very effective in depressive pseudodementia. Yeah. Next, coming to use of ECT in pregnancy and postpartum period. The use of psychotropics in pregnancy is associated with a twofold problem. In the first trimester, there is a risk of teratogenicity due to the ongoing organogenesis period. In the last trimester, using psychotropics has a risk of causing neonatal toxicity, such as in cases of lithium toxicity or respiratory depression with the use of benzodiazepines. At the other end, untreated psychiatric disorders by itself may also have an adverse effect on the baby. In these cases, ECTs are very effective. Many guidelines, in fact, recommend ECT as the first line of treatment for treating major depression and mania in the first trimester. The American Psychiatric Association Task Force on ECT also considers ECT as a low risk and high efficacy in management of specific disorders in all 3 trimesters of pregnancy. Now, the electrical stimulus by itself does not affect the fetus in any way. Convulsions are unlikely to be problematic due to the current use of modified ECTs. There is a risk of release of oxytocin secondary to the seizures or hypoxia during the ECT, which may cause uterine contractions and lead to premature labor. Maternal hypoxia may also lead to fetal bradyarrhythmias. At the other end, excessive hyperventilation may lead to respiratory alkalosis, leading to the shift of oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to the left and poor oxygen transfer to fetal hemoglobin. With respect to medications for modified procedure, anesthetic agents do cross placenta. However, as teratogenicity, the exposure to these medications is very brief and infrequent while being given for ECTs. Succinyl choline is minimal. With respect to anticholinergic agents, glycopyrrolate has much less placental. No reported teratogenesis. However, as they have not been systematically studied, it is a fact with the patient relative. Now, it is unlikely that a random controlled trial of efficacy of ECT in pregnant females, adverse outcomes might also be due to the adverse effects of the psychotropic medications, the anesthetic agents used during the ECT, or by the seizures and the convulsions themselves. Hence, a caution is needed to be exercised while attributing the causality to ECT or even otherwise. It is important that while discussing with the patient and their relatives, these things might be noted. Also, it is important that a significant reporting bias also happens as uneventful ECTs frequently go unreported. With respect to reported adverse outcomes of ECTs, different outcomes such as uterine contractions or premature labor, vaginal bleeding or abruptio placentae, and status epilepticus have been reported in females. Whereas transient fetal bradycardia, white matter hyperintensities, or even death of the fetus have been reported with respect to the fetus. However, the incidence rate of these things is very hard to estimate due to reporting bias. In fact, if you look at the literature, there are at least 4 systematic reviews that discuss adverse outcomes related to pregnancy and ECTs. Each give a different opinion with respect to the incident rate of these and the outcomes, as well as the precautions that need to be taken, with some saying ECTs as safe, while some recommending ECTs as the last line of treatment with respect to pregnancy. I would like you to go through the article of Sinha et al. 2016, which is a meta-review of these 4 systematic reviews, which discusses the merits and demerits of these 4 reviews before giving its own final opinions. While planning ECTs in pregnant females, it is important that a baseline risk with respect to abortion, abruptio placentae, premature labor, and uteroplacental sufficiency be undertaken, and possible causes such as urinary tract infection, fever might be treated with consultation with the obstetrician before posting a patient for ECTs. Additional monitoring such as that of fetal heart rate may be done after 16 weeks of pregnancy, and tachometer might also be used if indicated, with the best possible scenario being an obstetrician being there throughout the procedure. Other special cares that might be required after 20 weeks are that due to the gravid uterus, there might be compression of the great vessels. Hence, slight lateral position might be given to avoid pressure. Also, due to the gravid uterus, there might be a pressure on the lower esophageal sphincter leading to gastritis and risk of aspiration during ECTs. This might be avoided by use of ranitidine or metoclopramide 30 to 60 minutes before ECTs. Use of anticholinergics is minimized as much as possible, as they might lead to further lowering of the lower esophageal sphincter pressure. Slight propped up position might also be given. Some guidelines suggest considering intubation for every session of ECT. However, the benefit of this versus the risk of repeated intubation might have to be taken into consideration. With respect to post-ECT headache or muscle soreness, it is best to avoid all kinds of NSAIDs except paracetamol due to risk of affecting the maternal fetal homeostasis or causing premature closure of the ductus arteriosus. Coming to puerperium, there is a significant risk of psychiatric illness, especially mood disorders, in this group of population. There is a very little systematic data of the effects of psychotropic medications during breastfeeding. In such a case, anesthetic agents and muscle relaxants when exposed to the fetus during breastfeeding is very transient. Also, medications such as succinylcholine are very poorly absorbed in the gut. However, other medications might require careful consideration. One can also think of delaying breastfeeding after ECT or expressing the breast milk before ECT and then using the same to top feed the child. Lastly, coming to child and adolescent population, ECTs are rarely used in children and there is a very little systematic data available. In child and adolescent cases, the presentation of psychiatric illnesses is very frequently confusing. However, ECTs are generally considered effective in the presence of a clearly defined affective illness. There have been concerns about the effect of the electrical stimulus and the seizure on the developing brain. However, till date, there have been no report of serious adverse effects. Just as in elderly population, the seizure threshold is much higher. In children and adolescents, seizure threshold might be much lower, leading to an increased propensity of prolonged seizures or status epilepticus. Hence, EEG monitoring might be required to ensure that the seizures are terminated in cases of prolonged seizures. Also, due to ethical concerns, it is important that the consultation of 2 independent psychiatrists should be undertaken, particularly with respect to the current MHCA guidelines, before planning ECTs in this group of population. In conclusion, to quote the Handbook of ECT by the Royal College of Psychiatrists, on occasions when ECT is prescribed to save a life, there might be no absolute contraindications to it. As we have seen, there might be special challenges present in different populations while planning for ECTs. However, with proper assessments, consultation and precautions, ECT can be safely used and can be a useful therapeutic tool. it is also important to remember that there is no absolute indication for ECT either. Hence, it should not be forced upon a patient or the relative. As and when required, taking a high-risk consent and proper documentation, and always keeping the family members into the loop is required. The final aim should be bringing the mortality attributable to ECT directly as zero. In cases of failure to achieve this, it may reflect poor precautions, preparations, and inappropriate team to handle complications. These are some useful references for your further reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin, for your lucid presentation. Now we'll open the forum for question and answer session.
Yeah, I'm working as a faculty in SJ Medical College, but only one concern is like, especially in children's. But as of now, the Mental Health Care Act, which is coming, they say it should not be used in the children's below the age group of below 18 years. So, are there any special indications? Suppose if we think that this adolescent age group population or a patient does require ECT, are there any special provisions where you can consider giving? But MHCA clearly says no ECT.
No, it is not true, Sachin.
Okay, sir.
MHCA says that children can be given ECT if
Okay.
it is through the mental health review board.
Okay, sir. Okay. Got it.
So we cannot give without the board's approval.
Okay,
As
sir.
of now, there are no boards have been announced.
Sir, Dr. Rima has asked, for pregnancy, can you share the clinical experience in NIMHANS?
Yeah. So I think we have in the past about a decade or so. I don't know how many cases of pregnancy we have given, but I remember that there was one case with which went into labor, and we had to immediately shift the person. NIMHANS doesn't have a obstetrics facility, so we had to shift the patient to a general hospital. In my knowledge, this is the only one case where this has happened, and I think we have given. We give about 5 to about 10 patients with pregnancy every year. But if you are working in a general hospital, it's always better that one of the obstetricians is present, at least on call, to attend to anything that is required.
Sir, Dr. Pawan Nalatia has asked, he had a patient with history of fracture of spine with plate in the spine few years ago. Can we give ECT, and what is the precaution?
Yeah. So I think this case can be taken up. We have to request the anesthetist to give higher dose of succinylcholine so that the ECT should be completely modified. As in, there is a tendency in many clinics to give succinylcholine to reduce the severity of convulsions, like in NIMHANS. It is seldom that the person is completely paralyzed. But in this case, since there is a risk of some untoward incident in terms of spinal fracture, which has already happened, and then there can be further complications because of this. So it can be given, but the succinylcholine dose should be sufficient enough to cause complete paralysis. In that case, it is very important that you have to use the cuff method to the full effect, and also augment with EEG monitoring so that the convulsions are not missed. So I think you should go ahead with this case, given all these precautions.
He also has asked, he had a patient with history of head injury on no medication, no paper available. Can we give ECT, and what precautions should be taken?
A lot depends on the extent of head injury, especially recency. If it has happened very recently, if there is some mass effect, if there is a brain edema already, I wouldn't rush into giving ECT. If the history of head injury is, let's say, about a few months back or a year back, and you know exactly what is the extent of damage that has happened to the brain, and if you think that ECT wouldn't add more to cognitive adverse effects, etc., you can go ahead. It's just like any other person with. You should expect that the person may get more cognitive adverse effects. Person may be confused for longer. Person may get tardive seizures. Person may get delirium. So all these things are possible, but ECT can be given.
Sachin, can you go ahead with your question now?
Yeah, sir. What about the use of ECT in some patients with frontotemporal dementia, predominantly who have behavioral disturbances, especially with severe aggression, agitation? Because recently, one of the residents who passed out from Nimans, he was sharing his experience with us, saying they had given to some patients in behavioral variant of frontotemporal dementia, like frontal variant. They did have some improvement. So, what is your take on any indications in special cases among the dementia population?
ECT is not the. I wouldn't prefer to give ECT to this kind of patients. That is not my choice of treatment. I would try and exhaust other methods. Okay, I don't want to delve into the other field of how to manage these people, but I know that a lot of behavioral methods, a lot of care of medical condition itself, rationalization of medications, a number of things can help agitation in dementia. So assuming that all these things have been done, but yet the person is extremely agitated, there are a number of very good case reports of dramatic improvement in behavioral problems associated with dementia, not necessarily frontotemporal, but also frontotemporal dementia with ECT.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Mini Sharma, can you please unmute your mic and ask the question?
Hello, good afternoon, sir. So I wanted to know if ketamine could be considered as a better anesthetic agent, especially like in cases of severe depression with suicide risk, considering its antidepressant action also.
Yeah, I have covered this last time, but I can repeat it. Ketamine has good evidence for work for its use in severe depression, particularly if there is suicidality. ECT is also very good for severe depression, especially when there is suicidality. It is tempting to think that the combination would be good. People have done many RCTs. Unfortunately, overall evidence is not in favor of combination. In other words, it may not add anything to the already existing efficacy of either of ECT. So, in other words, if ketamine versus some other anesthetic agent has been compared, in such cases there has been no difference between the two. But ketamine per se may add to adverse effects, particularly hypertension, and to some extent the psychotic kind of process, it may worsen.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Reema, can you unmute your mic and ask your question?
Sir, as per your clinical experience in resistant OCD cases, what would be the clinical utility of administering ECT in such cases?
It is best that we keep this question to the next session, which is on indications. Today we are talking about challenging medical and special populations.
Dr. Jwala, can you unmute your mic and ask the question? She also has the same ketamine and depression.
Good evening, sir. In our institute, we are. Good evening, sir. In our institute, we are used to doing ketamine infusion for depressed patients. So, is there any additive effect in doing in putting a patient on ECT and maybe post ECT session giving ketamine infusion also?
Yeah, I just now said there is no additive effect, and whether ketamine can be given post ECT, I don't think there is evidence to either support or dispute this. So it is. I'm not the person to answer this.
Dr. Karthika, can you please unmute your mic and ask the question?
Hello, sir.
Please go ahead.
Sir. Sir, is there any minimum age for child if you are planning to take the child for ECT? Any age limit that we keep?
Currently, in most cases, if you look at the case reports, adolescent population is the primary age group where ECTs have been given. So there is no, cases where children have been administered ECTs are not as of now reported, I suppose. However, there is no particular age limit as such. If there are proper indications and a well-defined psychiatric illness, ECTs can be administered if following proper guidelines and indications.
Yeah, I think in NIMHANS we have given the minimum age is about 10 years. I do think that there are reports of even younger children being subjected to ECT.
Dr. Reema, again, you had a question.
Sir, looking at the geriatric population, what all challenges we should be prepared when we are posting a geriatric case for ECT?
Yeah, she has asked geriatric case, what all challenges we should be prepared for, and any specific precautions we should take.
I guess we just went through it in the presentation. One special challenge is that age is very frequently a determinant of high seizure threshold, and hence you can expect difficulty in inducing seizure in this group of population. The second major challenge is of cognitive side effects, and because of this you might require consideration of using ultra brief pulse over brief pulse, also keeping in mind that if not given at a supra-threshold dose, it might lead to a poor efficacy. One can also consider giving less frequent ECT sessions in this group of population. And it is important that cognition status is monitored very closely when the ECT sessions are going on.
Thank you for attending today's session on ECT in a special population. Before we conclude the program, we thank Linux Laboratories for their support through an educational grant for conducting these classes.